The sun hung low in the sky, spilling golden light across the rugged Arizona desert. Dust swirled gently in the warm breeze, carrying the faint smell of sage and dry earth. At a small, dusty trading post, a few wagons were parked haphazardly, and the wooden porch creaked under the weight of travelers coming and going. This place, far from towns and cities, was a meeting point for cowboys, traders, and the few local Native Americans who still roamed the land freely. It was here, amid the ordinary bustle of everyday life, that two very different people were about to cross paths. Jack Sullivan rode into the trading post on his horse, the leather of his saddle worn from years of travel. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had spent his life surviving in the open desert. His hat was tipped just enough to shield his eyes from the sun, but it could not hide the sharpness in his gaze. Jack had been on the trail for weeks, driving cattle across the plains, and he welcomed the trading post as a place to rest, eat, and maybe enjoy a little company. He had a reputation among other cowboys for being charming and bold, though some called him arrogant. But Jack had never met a challenge he did not enjoy, and he thrived on the thrill of meeting new people. Inside the trading post, the air was thick with the smell of smoked meat, leather, and wood polish. A few traders were speaking in low voices while counting coins, and a small child clung to the side of his mother, eyes wide with curiosity at the strangers passing through. But Jack's attention was not on the merchants or the child. It was on a woman who moved with quiet confidence among the supplies. She was an Apache woman, tall and poised, her hair tied back in a simple braid. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, scanned the shelves as she selected herbs and cloth, paying careful attention to quality. Her name was Nahele, and she carried herself with the pride of her people. She had grown up learning the ways of the desert, understanding how to find water where none seemed to exist, how to track animals silently, and how to negotiate with strangers without giving away too much. Today, she was at the trading post to gather supplies for her community. She knew the value of every coin and every piece of cloth she picked up, and she treated the work with the seriousness it deserved. When Jack saw her for the first time, he felt a spark of curiosity. He was not used to meeting women who met his gaze with calm, unwavering eyes. Most would smile, flirt, or shy away, but not Nahele. She looked at him directly, her expression unreadable, and it was in that moment that Jack decided to approach her. He had spent much of his life talking to people, breaking the ice with charm and wit, and he knew how to make his presence felt. "Hello there," Jack said, tipping his hat slightly. "You look like someone who knows what she's doing. Need a hand with those supplies?" Nahele's eyes narrowed slightly, and she tilted her head, observing him as if deciding whether he was worth her attention. She did not answer immediately, instead choosing to finish carefully selecting a bundle of herbs. Jack waited, his confidence not waning. He had learned that patience could be a tool almost as powerful as words. Once Nahele had gathered what she needed, she finally spoke. "I do not need help," she said simply, her voice calm but firm. There was no malice, but there was no invitation either. It was clear she was accustomed to handling things herself. Jack smiled, unconcerned by the rejection. In fact, her response only made him more interested. He had met many women, but few had the strength and poise of Nahele. "Fair enough," he said, "but I have to tell you something. You need a man like me." Nahele froze. The words were bold, almost brash, and yet they hung in the air between them. She had heard many statements from cowboys, traders, and wandering men, but none quite like this. For a moment, she simply stared at him, unsure how to respond. The words were not threatening, but they carried a weight she was not used to encountering. Jack leaned slightly against his horse, waiting for her reaction. He expected the usual flirtatious laugh, a playful shove, or at least a teasing retort. Instead, he was met with silence. Nahele's eyes held a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and something else he could not immediately identify. She was frozen, not out of fear, but out of consideration. She was trying to understand the man who stood before her so boldly. The desert around them seemed to hold its breath. The wind died down slightly, and the creak of the trading post's porch boards became more noticeable. Jack realized he had underestimated the depth of this woman's presence. She was not impressed by words, nor was she intimidated. She was assessing him, not for charm, but for truth. Naheli finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Why would I need someone like you?" There was no anger, no challenge, only a question that carried the weight of genuine inquiry. She was used to people offering help for reasons of profit or advantage. She had learned early in life to question intentions. Jack chuckled softly, not in mockery, but in acknowledgement of her insight. "Because," he said, choosing his words carefully, "I know how to survive out here. I've faced danger, made tough choices, and come out standing. And sometimes, having someone like me around makes the difference between getting by and getting through." Nahele considered this. She had always been surrounded by people who underestimated her, or judged her by appearances. Here was a man who was confident, but also honest about who he was. That honesty intrigued her. Yet, she was not quick to trust, and she kept her guard up. The conversation was interrupted by the trading post owner, who called for Jack to finalize a deal. Jack nodded at Naheli, a silent acknowledgement that their interaction was far from over. He walked toward the counter, exchanging coins and words with the merchant, but his mind kept returning to the woman who had frozen at his bold statement. Nahele, meanwhile, continued her work, her hands deftly handling the supplies. But her thoughts were also with the cowboy. She had met many men, but few had the courage to speak so openly, and yet so honestly. She felt a mix of irritation, curiosity, and reluctant respect. It was a feeling she had rarely experienced, and it left her unsettled in a way that was new and unfamiliar. After settling his business, Jack stepped outside, dust settling around his boots. He glanced back at Nahele, who was now loading her goods onto a small mule. She looked up briefly, meeting his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, they shared an understanding that went beyond words. It was a quiet acknowledgement of presence, of recognition that both were more than they seemed at first glance. The afternoon wore on, and the trading post began to quiet down. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Jack and Nahele moved toward the edge of the post, each attending to their animals and supplies, yet both aware of the other's presence. It was a beginning, subtle and unspoken, of something neither fully understood yet. Jack felt a stirring of respect for this woman who could stand firm in the face of his boldness. Nahele felt a cautious curiosity about a man who was confident enough to speak openly, yet patient enough to wait for her judgment. Neither knew what the future held, but in that moment, something important had begun, a connection built on honesty, respect, and the quiet tension of two strong wills meeting in a vast, challenging landscape. As the sun finally touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and orange, Jack mounted his horse, preparing to leave the trading post for the evening. Nahele secured her last bundle and mounted her mule, ready to return to her community. Their paths were about to diverge, but the memory of this encounter lingered in both their minds. It was a moment that would shape what came next, setting the stage for challenges, trust, and understanding that neither had anticipated. The desert, endless and silent, seemed to echo their meeting. A cowboy and an Apache woman, both shaped by the harsh realities of life in the Southwest, had crossed paths. One had approached with bold words, the other had responded with quiet strength, and though the future was uncertain, each had left a mark on the other's life that could not easily be erased. In the stillness of the desert evening, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the trading post emptied and quieted. Jack rode off into the distance, dust trailing behind his horse, and Nahele led her mule along the winding path toward her home. Both carried the memory of the encounter, each contemplating the unexpected connection that had stirred something within them. It was a beginning, fragile yet powerful, of a story that would unfold with courage, trust, and the gradual breaking of walls built by experience and culture. After their first encounter at the trading post, Jack Sullivan found himself thinking more about the Apache woman than he expected. Her calm confidence, the way she handled herself among traders, and the sharp intelligence in her eyes lingered in his mind. He had met many people on the trail, but few had left such an impression. Jack was used to traveling alone, making decisions on the fly, relying on his skills as a cowboy. But Naheli made him feel something different, something unfamiliar, a sense of challenge and curiosity he could not ignore. Meanwhile, Naheli had returned to the edge of her community, a small settlement nestled near a cluster of mesas and valleys. She rode slowly, her mule carrying bundles of supplies, and thought about the cowboy's words, "You need a man like me." The statement had startled her at first, but now, as she walked along the desert path, she pondered it carefully. She did not need anyone to protect her or her people. They were strong, resilient, and self-sufficient. Yet, there was a certain honesty in his approach. He had not claimed to be better than anyone else, only that his experience and abilities might be useful. That struck her differently than most men's boasts ever had. The next day, Jack did not return to the trading post immediately. Instead, he rode through the nearby hills, following the winding trails and observing the landscape. His curiosity about Naheli grew with every mile. He knew her community was nearby, and he wondered about their ways, their daily life, and how she managed responsibilities that would challenge even the most experienced man. Jack's life had been solitary, spent on cattle drives and in open plains, but he had always been drawn to people who were strong, clever, and independent. Naheli fit that description perfectly. As fate would have it, their paths crossed again by a small river a few miles from the settlement. Jack had ridden there to rest his horse and refill his canteens, and Naheli was gathering medicinal plants and herbs along the riverbank. The river was shallow, its water clear and cool, reflecting the blue sky above. The gentle sound of flowing water filled the air, blending with the soft rustle of desert grass. Both paused when they saw each other, acknowledging the unexpected meeting. Jack dismounted, approaching slowly, careful not to startle her. "Good morning," he said, tipping his hat once again. "I did not expect to see you here." Naheli studied him silently for a moment, then replied, "I could say the same about you." Her tone was calm, but held a subtle firmness, signaling that she would not be easily impressed or intimidated. Jack smiled, sensing her strength. "I thought I might find you again," he admitted. "I wanted to talk, and maybe learn a bit about the land from someone who knows it better than me." Naheli raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what makes you think you have anything to teach me?" she asked, her voice steady. She was testing him, as she always did with strangers, observing their intentions before allowing trust to form. "I don't mean to teach," Jack said. "I mean to share. I've seen a lot out here on the trail. I've faced storms, rustlers, and harsh deserts. I've learned to survive, and I think perhaps we could learn from each other." Naheli considered his words. She was accustomed to people who boasted about their accomplishments or belittled her knowledge. But Jack spoke differently. He spoke honestly, without arrogance. That made her cautious curiosity grow into something more substantial. Over the next few hours, they walked along the riverbank, collecting herbs, talking about the desert, and sharing small stories of their lives. Jack spoke of the long cattle drives, the nights under endless skies, and the moments when he had relied on nothing but his instincts to survive. Naheli spoke of her community, the challenges of maintaining their traditions, and the ways she had learned to navigate a world that often underestimated her. As they walked, the initial tension between them began to fade. Laughter started to appear in their conversation, small, genuine moments of amusement at stories and observations. Jack laughed at the ingenuity of some of Naheli's methods for tracking animals and finding water. Naheli smiled at Jack's tales of mishaps on the trail, like a horse slipping on a muddy path or a stubborn steer refusing to move. Despite the growing connection, both remained cautious. Jack had lived a life where trust was hard-earned. Naheli had grown up learning that not all strangers were friends, and some could bring danger if not carefully assessed. Yet, in the quiet of the desert, with only the river and the wind as witnesses, a tentative bond began to form. At one point, Jack paused to refill his water canteen, sitting on a large rock by the river. He looked at Nahele, who was kneeling to examine a cluster of plants, and said softly, "You know, I've met many people out here. Most talk a lot, but few act with the honesty you do. It's rare." Nahele looked up, her eyes meeting his. She did not respond immediately, but there was a flicker of acknowledgement in her gaze. She had grown used to people saying flattering words, but she sensed that Jack meant what he said. The calm honesty in his voice reached a part of her that was often guarded. As the day went on, Jack suggested they share a meal by the river. He pulled out some dried meat, bread, and water from his saddlebag. Nahele offered some of her herbs and a few root vegetables she had gathered. They sat on the rocks, the sun warming their backs, sharing food and stories. The conversation shifted from survival to more personal matters. Jack spoke about moments of loneliness on the trail and the dreams he carried beyond mere survival. Nahele spoke of her hopes for her community, her desire to protect traditions, and the quiet joy she found in simple things: the river's song, the wind in the mesas, the resilience of her people. By the time the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, they had shared much, yet neither had overstepped boundaries. There was a sense of understanding developing between them, an awareness that each saw the other as more than appearances or words. Jack admired Nahele's strength and wisdom, while Nahele admired Jack's courage and honesty. The evening was calm, and Jack suggested they set up a small camp nearby, rather than return to the trading post immediately. "It's safer to rest here than ride back in the dark," he explained, and Nahele nodded, recognizing the practicality of his suggestion. They built a small fire, the flames flickering and casting warm light across their faces. Shadows danced on the rocks, and the gentle river rippled nearby. As night fell, the desert revealed a sky filled with stars, each one bright and distant, illuminating the vastness around them. Jack and Nahele sat quietly for a moment, simply observing. It was a rare silence, one that did not demand conversation but allowed reflection. Jack found himself thinking about how different Nahele was from anyone he had met. She carried wisdom beyond her years, courage that did not need recognition, and a calm strength that grounded him. Nahele, in turn, reflected on Jack's ability to be honest about who he was, his willingness to share without demanding trust, and the way he listened rather than judged. The fire crackled softly, and Jack broke the silence. "I never expected to meet someone like you," he said quietly. "Most people on the trail, they talk, they boast, or they judge. You're different." Nahele smiled faintly, a subtle gesture that held more meaning than words could convey. "And I never expected to meet a man who speaks as he does and yet does not try to control or impress," she replied. Her words were careful but sincere. She was acknowledging a rare honesty she found in Jack, a respect for her as a person rather than a challenge to conquer. They shared a simple meal by the fire, then sat in companionable silence as the night deepened. Crickets chirped softly, and the occasional hoot of an owl echoed across the desert. The bond between them grew quietly, not with grand gestures or declarations, but with shared presence, understanding, and the slow realization that they could trust each other, at least a little. By the time they decided to rest for the night, a subtle shift had occurred. Jack no longer viewed Nahele simply as a challenge or curiosity. He respected her wisdom, strength, and independence. Nahele, in turn, no longer saw Jack only as a bold cowboy with audacious words. She recognized courage, honesty, and a willingness to listen. They had begun to see each other as equals, not strangers separated by culture or expectation. As they lay under the stars, the desert quiet around them, both felt a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. They did not yet know what the coming days would bring, but each was aware that this meeting was different. It was not fleeting. It was the beginning of a connection that would be tested by challenges, shaped by trust, and deepened by mutual respect. The night passed quietly, with only the sound of the river and the occasional breeze through the desert grass. By morning, both were awake early, ready to continue their day. Jack prepared his horse, while Nahile organized her herbs and supplies. There was a sense of unspoken understanding they would continue together for a short while, learning from each other, observing, and discovering the strengths they each brought to the table. As the first light of dawn touched the desert, casting soft shadows and warming the earth, Jack and Nahile set off together along the winding paths. Neither spoke much at first, but the silence was comfortable, filled with a sense of shared purpose and respect. Each step they took strengthened a fragile bond that had begun in an unexpected encounter at a trading post. And so, with the desert stretching endlessly before them, they embarked on a journey not only across the land, but into the slowly unfolding story of trust, understanding, and mutual discovery. A story that neither could have anticipated, but both would carry with them as the days unfolded. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast landscape of golden sands, rocky mesas, and sparse vegetation. The sun climbed high into the sky, making the air shimmer with heat. Jack and Nahile continued along the winding trails, their pace steady and cautious. They moved with purpose, yet both were aware of the unspoken tension that had begun to grow between them, a tension born of curiosity, mutual respect, and the thrill of learning from each other, in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. Jack had always been comfortable in the solitude of the desert. He knew its dangers and its secrets. He had spent countless nights under the stars, listening to the wind whisper through the canyons and the distant howl of coyotes. But now, walking beside Nahile, he felt something he had not experienced in a long time. The awareness that he was not alone in his journey, that someone else's knowledge and strength could be as vital as his own. Nahile, on the other hand, had grown up in a community that valued self-reliance. From a young age, she had learned to navigate the desert, track animals, find water, and care for her people. She was cautious, intelligent, and independent. Yet, as she walked beside Jack, she realized that his experience offered something different. A perspective shaped by years of survival on the open trail. He had faced dangers she had not, yet he respected the land in ways that reminded her of her own people's values. Their journey took them through narrow canyons where the sunlight barely reached the ground. The walls of rock towered above them, casting long shadows that shifted with the movement of the sun. Birds circled overhead, and the faint rustle of small desert creatures added life to the otherwise silent landscape. Jack rode slightly ahead, keeping a careful watch for any signs of trouble, while Nahile moved with grace and precision, her eyes scanning the terrain for hazards. It was during this part of the journey that they encountered their first real challenge. A group of rustlers, men known for raiding travelers and settlements, appeared on a nearby ridge. Their horses kicked up dust, and they shouted, waving weapons in the air. Jack immediately recognized the danger and motioned for Nahile to stay behind a rocky outcrop. His mind raced, calculating the best way to handle the situation. He knew that confrontation could be deadly, but hesitation could be worse. Nahile observed quietly, noting Jack's movements and strategy. She understood the importance of quick thinking and precision, but she also knew the desert could be a friend or an enemy, depending on how one used it. She watched as Jack signaled silently to a small path leading to higher ground, allowing them to gain a better vantage point. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained focused. This was not fear, it was preparation, honed through years of practice and awareness. The rustlers approached, unaware of the duo hidden among the rocks. Jack acted swiftly, positioning himself to appear more threatening than he actually was. He raised his rifle, his movements deliberate and confident, while Nahile supported him by keeping watch and signaling with subtle gestures. The rustlers hesitated, unsure of what they were confronting. Jack's calm confidence and strategic positioning gave them pause, and they eventually decided it was not worth the risk. They turned their horses and disappeared over the ridge, leaving Jack and Nahile unharmed but alert. After the danger had passed, Jack exhaled slowly and glanced at Nahile. "You were incredible," he said. "I don't know what I would have done without your guidance." Nahile nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "You handled it well too," she replied. "Courage is important, but so is caution. You need both to survive out here." The encounter changed something between them. Jack saw Nahele not just as a companion but as an equal in strategy and strength. Nahele, in turn, recognized that Jack's experience and calm under pressure made him reliable and trustworthy. It was the first real test of their growing bond, and they had passed it together. As the day wore on, they continued along the trails, navigating rocky terrain and shallow streams. They shared stories to pass the time, tales of past adventures, personal struggles, and lessons learned from their respective lives. Jack spoke of the loneliness of long cattle drives, of nights spent under endless skies, where he had relied solely on his instincts. Nahele shared memories of her community, of the responsibilities she carried, and of the pride she felt in her heritage. Each story brought them closer, creating a tapestry of understanding and respect. By mid-afternoon, they reached a small plateau overlooking a wide valley. The view was breathtaking. Mesas rose like sentinels, and the desert stretched to the horizon, dotted with sparse vegetation and winding trails. Jack and Nahele paused, letting the wind cool their faces and taking in the beauty around them. It was a moment of peace, a brief respite from the challenges of the desert. Jack looked at Nahele and spoke quietly. "It's rare to meet someone who understands the land and its dangers as you do. I've seen a lot of people, but few like you." Nahele met his gaze steadily. "And it's rare to meet someone who speaks honestly about themselves and doesn't pretend to know everything," she replied. "You are brave, and you are careful. That combination is impressive." Their words hung in the air, not boastful but sincere, acknowledging the qualities they admired in each other. It was a turning point, a recognition that their partnership was more than convenience. It was built on mutual respect and understanding. As evening approached, they decided to make camp near a small cluster of rocks that offered some shelter from the wind. Jack gathered firewood while Nahele prepared their meal, a simple mix of dried meat, roots, and herbs. The fire crackled, casting warm light and shadows across their faces. They ate in comfortable silence at first, then gradually shared thoughts about the day's events. Jack spoke of the rustlers, reflecting on how quickly danger could appear and how important it was to stay calm. Nahele shared insights about tracking and observation, explaining how small details in the environment could reveal hidden threats or opportunities. Their conversation was practical yet personal, blending survival skills with glimpses into their character and values. After the meal, they sat by the fire, the desert night surrounding them. The sky was filled with stars, more than either had seen in a long time. Jack leaned back, letting the warmth of the fire and the calm of the night sink in. "I've spent a lot of nights alone under the stars," he said softly, "but this feels different. It's not just the land I'm seeing, it's the company, the understanding. It matters." Nahele nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "It does matter," she said. "Trust is hard to find, and understanding is rarer still. You've shown both today, and it is noticed." The night passed quietly, filled with the subtle sounds of the desert, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of small animals in the brush, the whisper of wind through the rocks. Jack and Nahele slept under the open sky, each aware of the other's presence without words. There was a sense of connection that had grown through shared experiences, respect, and the quiet understanding that they could rely on one another. The next morning brought new challenges. They continued along the desert trails, navigating steep inclines and narrow passes. The terrain tested their endurance, requiring careful coordination and cooperation. Jack's experience in the open desert proved invaluable, while Nahele's intimate knowledge of the land guided them safely through hidden hazards. Together, they moved as a team, each contributing skills the other lacked. During a rest by a small oasis, they spoke of their hopes and dreams. Jack confessed that his life had often felt lonely, even in the company of others, because few truly understood the challenges of life on the trail. Nahele shared her desire to protect her community, to maintain their traditions, and to guide younger members in the ways of the land. Their conversation deepened their connection, revealing vulnerabilities and aspirations that strengthened the trust between them. By the time they reached the outskirts of Nahele's community, both had changed. Jack had learned humility, recognizing that his confidence alone was not enough to navigate the complexities of life alongside someone like Nahele. Nahele had begun to see Jack as more than a bold cowboy. She saw loyalty, courage, and the willingness to listen and adapt. As they approached the settlement, elders and community members acknowledged Jack's presence with cautious curiosity. They had heard of travelers, but few were welcomed without scrutiny. Jack's actions during their journey, however, spoke louder than words. He had proven himself capable, respectful, and trustworthy. Nahele's quiet guidance and his demonstrated courage created a bridge between their worlds, a rare and valuable connection. The day ended with a quiet sense of accomplishment. Jack and Nahele had faced danger, navigated challenges, and learned from one another. Their bond had strengthened, not through grand gestures, but through shared experience, mutual respect, and the understanding that survival often depended on cooperation and trust. As the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Jack and Nahele sat quietly, reflecting on the journey. The desert had tested them, shaped them, and brought them together in ways neither could have anticipated. They knew challenges lay ahead, but they also knew that, together, they could face whatever the desert and life might bring. The sun rose slowly over the desert horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the mesas and valleys surrounding Nahele's community. Jack and Nahele stood at the edge of the settlement, taking in the sight of her people beginning their morning routines. Smoke rose gently from small cooking fires, and the soft murmur of conversation carried through the crisp air. It was a place of resilience, of tradition, and of quiet strength. Much like the woman who had guided him through the desert, over the past days, their bond had grown through shared challenges, trust, and mutual respect. Jack had proven himself reliable, brave, and humble in ways that mattered far more than bold words or bravado. Nahele had demonstrated wisdom, courage, and patience, showing him that strength came in many forms. Their journey together had transformed them both, and now, standing at the edge of her community, they were about to face the final moments that would define their connection. The day began with simple tasks. Jack helped Nahele's people transport supplies from the river to the settlement. He lifted heavy bundles, guided pack animals, and offered suggestions based on his experience on the trail. Nahele observed closely, noting his ability to adapt to unfamiliar tasks without arrogance or complaint. She had seen many outsiders come and go, but few had integrated themselves with such quiet respect. As they worked, children and elders alike began to notice Jack's presence. He greeted them with humility, offering a smile or a helping hand, never overstepping the boundaries of the community. Nahele's eyes met his frequently, silently acknowledging the effort he was putting in, the respect he was showing, and the patience he had learned through their shared journey. Around midday, an unexpected challenge arose. A sudden storm rolled across the desert, dark clouds swallowing the bright sun and sending gusts of wind whipping through the settlement. Dust and sand filled the air, and the community scrambled to secure their belongings. Jack moved quickly, helping to tie down supplies and guide animals to shelter. Nahele coordinated with the elders, directing people to safe areas and using her knowledge of the land to anticipate the storm's path. The storm tested their teamwork and resilience. Jack relied on Nahele's guidance, while she depended on his strength and quick thinking. Together, they ensured that the community remained safe and that no lives were lost. When the storm finally passed, leaving a calm but humid silence, the elders gathered to acknowledge Jack's contribution. "You have shown courage and respect," one elder said. "Few outsiders would have acted with such care. You honor not only yourself, but our people as well." Jack nodded humbly, glancing at Nahele. "I only did what I thought was right," he replied, "and I learned much from your guidance. None of it would have been possible without her." He gestured toward Nahele, who met his eyes with a quiet, approving smile. The storm had solidified Jack's place in the community, not as an outsider, but as someone who had earned respect through action and integrity. Nahele felt a sense of pride not just in her people, but in the man who had walked beside her through danger and challenge. She realized that trust had been built not through words, but through deeds, and that Jack had proven himself in ways that mattered most. In the afternoon, they walked together to a high plateau overlooking the valley. The storm had washed the desert, leaving the rocks and sand glistening in the sunlight. The air was cool and fresh, and the view stretched for miles. Jack and Nahele sat in silence, taking in the beauty of the land and reflecting on all that had occurred. Jack broke the quiet, his voice soft. "I've spent much of my life on the trail, alone and focused on survival. I never thought I would find someone who understands, who sees me for who I really am." Nahele looked at him steadily, her dark eyes thoughtful. "And I have spent my life protecting my people, making decisions, and relying on my own strength. I never thought I would meet someone who listens, who respects, and who walks beside me without trying to take control." There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of the wind and the distant call of a hawk. Neither needed to speak further. Their experiences had spoken volumes. They had faced challenges together, learned from one another, and built a connection that transcended words. As the day wore on, Jack helped the community prepare for the evening. He assisted in cooking, carrying water, and organizing supplies for the following day. Nahele moved among her people, guiding them with quiet authority, while also sharing moments of laughter and conversation with Jack. It was a harmony of cooperation, respect, and shared responsibility. By late afternoon, it was time for Jack to consider his departure. His path as a cowboy called him back to the open trail, to the cattle drives, and the life of constant movement he had always known. Yet, leaving now felt different. The bond he had formed with Nahele and her community had changed him. He understood the value of trust, patience, and humility in ways he never had before. Nahele accompanied him to the edge of the settlement. The wind carried the scent of desert flowers and the faint smoke from cooking fires. Both knew that their time together, while brief, had been transformative. Jack spoke first, his voice quiet but firm. "I've learned much from you. Your strength, your wisdom. It has changed how I see the world, and myself. I will never forget it." Nahele nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight from their earlier campfires and the warmth of their shared journey. "And I have learned that strength is not only in self-reliance, but also in trust. You have shown that courage can come in many forms, and that respect and humility matter more than bold words." There was a moment of silence, heavy with unspoken emotions. They had shared trials, laughter, and quiet reflection. Their bond was deep, built on experience rather than fleeting attraction. It was a connection forged in trust, understanding, and the shared hardships of life in the desert. Jack mounted his horse, while Nahele watched him with quiet admiration. She had come to respect him not just as a man, but as a companion who had earned her trust and shown genuine character. Jack looked back at her, tipping his hat in a gesture of respect. "Farewell, Nahele. Until our paths cross again." Nahele nodded, her expression calm yet filled with emotion. "Farewell, Jack. May your journey be safe, and may you carry what you have learned with you." As he rode away, Jack felt a sense of completion and gratitude. He had arrived at the community as an outsider, bold and confident. But he left having gained something far more valuable: understanding, respect, and a meaningful connection. Nahele returned to her community, carrying with her the knowledge that trust and courage could bridge worlds, and that bonds formed in shared experiences could endure even the vast distance of the desert. The following days saw Jack continuing on his trail, yet he often found his thoughts drifting back to Nahele and her people. He remembered the lessons he had learned, the quiet strength of the woman who had challenged and inspired him, and the way they had faced danger and life together. Nahele, in turn, reflected on Jack's integrity, courage, and willingness to learn. She shared stories of him with the younger members of her community, teaching them that strength could be found not only in oneself, but in the trust and respect one gives to others. Though their paths had diverged, the bond remained. They had each been transformed by their experiences together. Jack was no longer only a cowboy on the trail. He was a man who understood the value of partnership, humility, and mutual respect. Nahali was no longer only a guardian of her people. She was a woman who recognized the power of trust and collaboration, and the strength that comes from seeing others as equals. In the vast desert, under skies that shifted from the deep blue of day to the sparkling stars of night, their story lingered. It was a tale not of romance alone, but of growth, courage, and understanding across cultures and experiences. They had faced danger, shared wisdom, and built a connection that transcended words, proving that true strength often lies in respect, humility, and the willingness to learn from one another. As months passed, the memory of their journey continued to shape them. Jack carried the lessons of patience, trust, and understanding into every encounter on the trail. He found himself observing the people and land around him with a new perspective, guided by the wisdom he had learned from Nahali. Nahali, meanwhile, continued to lead her community with renewed insight, remembering that alliances and understanding could strengthen her people and bring harmony where once there was distance. Though separated by miles, their bond remained a quiet, enduring connection, forged in the desert, tested by challenges, and strengthened by mutual respect. And in that way, both Jack and Nahali carried forward a story of courage, integrity, and the quiet power of human connection, proving that even brief encounters could leave a lasting mark on a lifetime. The sun set once more over the desert, casting long shadows and painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. Jack rode on the trail, his heart and mind filled with gratitude for the journey he had shared. Nahali returned to her community, her spirit strengthened, and her resolve deepened. And though they walked separate paths, the lessons, respect, and trust they had built together remained, shaping the rest of their lives in ways neither could have foreseen.